There comes a moment in every man's life when he stops being who he was and becomes who he has to be. For Bumpy Johnson, that moment began at exactly 8:13 p.m. on February 12, 1924, and it lasted 3 hours and 4 minutes. Before that night, Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was invisible. A 19-year-old kid from South Carolina, 3 years into life in Harlem. He worked whatever jobs he could find, kept his head down, read when he had time, and stayed clear of trouble. He wasn't connected. He wasn't dangerous. Just another quiet black kid trying to survive in a city that had no interest in him surviving. Then, at 8:13 p.m., his sister Margaret came through the door. She was crying. Her dress was torn. One cheek was swollen and red. 3 white men had just reminded her violently that being colored meant swallowing, humiliation, and calling it normal. People who knew Bumpy said something changed in him at that exact moment. Not slowly, not over time. Something inside him cracked and reformed into something harder, colder, something that no longer cared about consequences. The first man Bumpy found, he was still apologizing as he hit him. I'm sorry, but you touched her." The second man got no apologies, only calculated violence, bones broken with intention, damage done carefully enough to last. A lesson carved into muscle and memory. By the time he reached the third man, the leader witnesses said, Bumpy's eyes looked wrong, empty, like he'd gone somewhere inside himself, where mercy didn't exist, where compassion had no words. When it was over, the 3 men lay broken, and Bumpy stood alone in the street. Someone asked him why he did it, and that was the last time anyone ever asked Bumpy Johnson a question he didn't already know the answer to. And Bumpy, his breath ragged, his voice barely steady, said something that would define the next 40 years of his life. "They made my sister cry. Nobody makes my family cry. Not cops, not gangs, not anybody. And if they do, they learn what crying really means." The police arrived later and found nothing. Witnesses remembered nothing. Streets that had been full minutes earlier suddenly went blind and deaf, and the boy who had walked into that night never walked back out. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson, the quiet kid, died on those streets. In his place, Harlem's protector was born. To understand what happened that February night, you have to understand Harlem in 1924. This wasn't the Harlem Renaissance you read about in textbooks, not yet. That version came later, when white America decided black culture was fashionable. In 1924, Harlem was rougher, harder, still unfinished. 200,000 black people packed into men and women working jobs that paid half of what white workers earned, trying to build families, businesses, and dignity in a city that saw them as threats, as servants saw as both. The streets had rules, unwritten, but absolute. Stay on your side of town. Don't talk back to white folks. Don't look at white women. Don't challenge. Don't resist. Accept that this is how things aren't, how they will always be. And if you broke those rules, if you forgot your place, that's what men like the Hudson Dusters were for. Tommy Connors and his crew controlled the docks, the speakeasies, and the western edge of Harlem. 3 Irishmen, all convinced that being white meant they could do whatever they wanted, to whoever they wanted. For years they'd collected protection money, terrorized shopkeepers, and reminded black residents that this might be their neighborhood. But white men still owned it. On the evening of February 12, 1924, they saw Margaret Johnson. Margaret was 21 years old. She worked as a seamstress in a downtown shop and earned just enough to help her brother cover the rent on their small apartment on West 139th Street. She was careful, smart. She knew the rules. She walked with her eyes down, never caused trouble, never gave anyone a reason to notice her. But that night, she made one mistake. She wore a nice dress, blue cotton with white trim. Nothing fancy, just clean, well-fitted. A dress that said she took pride in herself, that she wasn't grateful for scraps, that she saw herself as worth something. The Hudson Dusters saw that dress and mistook it for disrespect. It happened at 7:30 p.m. on the corner of 134th and Lenox Avenue. The street was alive, workers heading home, shopkeepers closing up, the early evening crowd gathering outside speakeasy. Margaret was walking, hands tucked into her coat pockets, thinking about dinner, wondering whether her brother had remembered to buy bread, like she'd asked. Then 3 men stepped out of an alley and blocked her path. "Where you going, girl?" The leader was Tommy Connors, 28 years old, 6 feet tall, a knife scar running down his left cheek from a fight in Brooklyn. "That's a mighty nice dress for a colored girl," he said, "Where'd you steal it from?" Margaret didn't answer. She tried to walk around them. That was the rule: don't engage, don't escalate, just get away. They didn't let her. One of them, Patrick Flynn, grabbed her arm. "Tommy asked you a question," he said. "You deaf or just stupid?" Margaret pulled free. "I bought it," she said. "Now excuse me." And that was the moment everything stopped being the way it was and became the way it had to be. That's when Tommy Connors laughed. A loud, ugly laugh that carried down the block and made people turn their heads. "She bought it," he said. "You hear that, boys? This girl thinks she's quality." The word he used hung in the air sharp, deliberate, meant to wound. Margaret felt her face burn. There were 50 people on that street. Every one of them heard it. Every one of them kept walking, because that's what you did in Harlem in 1924. You heard things, you saw things, and you kept moving. The Hudson Dusters weren't finished. Flynn shoved Margaret back against the brick wall, not hard enough to break bones, just hard enough to make her stumble, hard enough to show everyone watching exactly who held power here. "You know what your problem is?" Connors said, stepping closer. "You people don't know your place. You come up here from the south thinking you're gonna be something, but you're not. You never will be." He grabbed the collar of her dress and yanked the fabric torn out all the way, just enough to bare her shoulder, enough to humiliate. Sean O'Brien laughed and whistled like she was an animal. Margaret felt tears rise, not from fear, but from rage, from the crushing certainty that nothing she said or did would matter. These men could do whatever they wanted. The police wouldn't come, and if they did, they'd probably help. Then Tommy Connors made his final mistake, slapped her. The sound cracked across the street, sharp, public, final. His handprint bloomed red on her cheek. "That's for talking back," he said. "Next time, keep walking when white men speak to you." The 3 men walked off laughing, congratulating each other, talking about what they'd do if they saw her again. Margaret Johnson stayed where she was, pressed against the wall, dress torn, cheek burning, while 50 people passed her like she didn't exist. 40-3 minutes later, she opened the door to their apartment. Bumpy was at the kitchen table, reading like always. This time it was a book about Napoleon's military campaigns. He read everything: history, philosophy, strategy. He'd left school at 14, but he never stopped studying. He wanted to understand how power worked, how men commanded others, how wars were won. He looked up. The book slipped from his hands. Margaret wasn't crying anymore. She'd stopped 3 blocks away, wiped her face, smoothed the tear in her dress, put on the expression she always wore, the one that said everything was fine, that this was just life. Bumpy saw through it instantly. He stood, crossed the room, and said nothing, just looked. The torn fabric, the swollen cheek, the eyes that were dry now, but hadn't been before. His voice was quiet, too quiet. Margaret shook her head. "It doesn't matter who." "Bumpy, don't. I don't care who they are." Same calm voice, controlled, and that frightened her more than shouting ever could. "Tell me who did this." She tried to be strong, tried to tell him it wasn't worth it, that the Hudson Dusters would kill him, that he had to let it go. Then she looked at her little brother and saw something she'd never seen before. Not anger. Anger would have been better. This was colder. This was certainty. "They touched you," Bumpy said softly. "They made you cry." He met her eyes. "Nobody does that," he said. "Not to you. Not ever." "What are you going to do?" Margaret whispered. Bumpy's expression didn't change. "I'm going to make them sorry they were born." Bumpy Johnson said it without raising his voice. There was no anger in it, no drama, just certainty. Then he turned and walked out. The door closed softly behind him, and Margaret Johnson stood alone in the kitchen, listening to the echo fade. She knew, without knowing how she knew, that if her brother came back at all, he would not be the same person who had just left. Some doors, once closed, never opened the same way again. What the Hudson Dusters didn't know, what nobody in Harlem knew, was that Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson had been preparing for this night his entire life. Not consciously, not intentionally, but survival has a way of teaching lessons deeper than classrooms ever could. A way of teaching lessons deeper than classrooms ever could. A boy who learned to fight before he learned to DREM. Before Harlem, there was South Carolina. Before city streets and tenements, there were dirt roads, hunger, and the unspoken rules of the Jim Crow South. Bumpy learned early that the world was divided into those who could do harm and those who had to endure it. He learned that fairness was a luxury, and mercy was never guaranteed. He wasn't trained, he wasn't a boxer, Nobody taught him technique or footwork. What he learned came from necessity. You hit first, you hit hard, and you don't stop until the threat is gone, because losing didn't just mean pain. Losing meant you'd be targeted again tomorrow. And the day after that, he fought white boys who thought his size made him weak. He fought hunger. He fought fear. He fought the constant pressure to stay small, quiet, grateful. By the time he came north to Harlem, he carried those lessons with him. He didn't look for trouble. He didn't posture. He read books, history, philosophy, military strategy, men who understood power, men who knew that violence, when used deliberately, reshaped the world. And now, on one February night in 1924, 3 men had crossed the one line Bumpy Johnson would never forgive. They made his sister feel unsafe. The first man, Flynn, was exactly where careless men always ended up: outside MCN's pub on 133rd Street, drunk, alone, leaning against brick, like the night itself owed him something. The same man who had grabbed Margaret's arm. The same man who had laughed while her dress tore. Flynn didn't hear Bumpy approach, didn't sense danger. He heard a footstep, turned, and saw a young black man standing too close for comfort. Flynn smirked, opened his mouth. Bumpy hit him, not wildly, not emotionally. A clean, direct punch to the nose. Cartilage collapsed with a sound like breaking wood. Blood poured instantly. Flynn staggered backward, confusion replacing arrogance. Before he could speak, Bumpy hit him again, this time in the ribs. Something cracked. Flynn folded, gasping, sliding down the wall. That's when Bumpy spoke. "You touched my sister." His voice was calm, conversational, almost gentle. "You grabbed her arm. You called her names. You thought it was funny." Flynn tried to crawl away. Bumpy kicked him precise, measured, into the kidneys. "I'm sorry," Flynn wheezed. "I'm sorry. I didn't mean no," Bumpy said, kicking him again. "You're sorry, you're hurting. That's different." He crouched down and grabbed Flynn by the collar, pulling his face close. "My name is Bumpy Johnson. Margaret is my sister. And every time you look in a mirror and see what I did to your face tonight, I want you to remember this moment." He leaned closer. "You don't touch black women, ever." Flynn nodded frantically through blood and tears. Bumpy stood, looked down at the broken man, and felt something unexpected. Calm. Not joy, not satisfaction. Clarity, as if all those hours reading about power, discipline, and consequence had been rehearsals for this exact moment. He walked away and went to find the second man. The second man, O'Brien, was drinking in a speakeasy on West 137th Street. 30 people were inside, drinking, pretending the world wasn't what it was. Nobody noticed Bumpy at first. A young black man didn't draw attention unless he asked for it. But when he walked straight toward O'Brien's table, something shifted. Conversation softened. Laughter faded. People felt it before they understood it. This wasn't a kid looking for trouble. This was trouble looking for someone. "You were on 134th and Lenox today," Bumpy said. Not a question. O'Brien looked up, saw split knuckles, blood on Bumpy's shirt. His hand moved toward his coat. Bumpy grabbed a bottle from a nearby table and smashed it across O'Brien's head. The room exploded. Shouts, chairs scraping, people scrambling backward. O'Brien half drew a knife before Bumpy struck again, the broken glass cutting deep across his face. The fight was brutal and fastless in 2 minutes. When it ended, O'Brien lay on the floor bleeding, sounds coming from his mouth that didn't quite form words. Bumpy stood over him, breathing hard now, blood on his hands, blood on his coat. His own lip split from a punch O'Brien had landed. "You laughed," Bumpy said hoarsely, "when they hurt my sister." He nodded once. "That makes you responsible." The bartender screamed about the police. Nobody moved. Nobody stopped Bumpy when he walked out, because everyone in that room had just seen something they'd never seen before. A black kid who didn't run, didn't plead, didn't care what came next. The third Connors wasn't hiding. He'd heard what happened, heard his men were in the hospital, heard whispers of a teenager who didn't understand his place. Tommy had killed men, broken men. He wasn't about to let a kid ruin his reputation. So when Bumpy found him back at MCN's pub, Tommy was ready, knife in his belt, brass knuckles in his pocket. "You must be the Johnson boy," Tommy said, standing. "You put my boys down. Took guts, but you made a mistake coming for me." Bumpy didn't answer. Tommy swung first. The brass knuckles caught Bumpy's jaw, snapping his head sideways. The knife came next to fast slash aimed at the ribs. Bumpy twisted just enough. The blade caught cloth, not skin. Bumpy grabbed Tommy's wrist and slammed it against the bar. The knife clattered to the floor. Then it was just violence. No technique, no space. Chairs broke, bottles shattered. Tommy was bigger, stronger, more experienced. He landed heavy shots to ribs, face, stomach. But Tommy was fighting to win. Bumpy was fighting like his sister's safety depended on it. A chair caught Bumpy across the back. He went down. "Stay down, boy," Tommy said. "This doesn't have to happen." Bumpy grabbed the knife from the floor and slashed upward, catching Tommy's leg, not deep enough. Tommy stumbled. Bumpy rose, grabbed a bottle, and smashed it across Tommy's face. Tommy went down hard. Bumpy mounted him and began hitting methodical, precise, relentless. Every punch carried every insult Margaret had swallowed, every tear she'd held back, every moment of helplessness. Eventually, Tommy stopped fighting. He just lay there, broken. The STRID. Bumpy dragged Tommy through Harlem to the corner of 134th and Lenox. Windows opened, doors cracked. Word traveled fast. He threw Tommy into the street. "On your knees." Tommy's face was unrecognizable. Blood spilled when he tried to speak. "On your knees." Tommy obeyed. "Apologize," Bumpy said, "to my sister, and to everyone watching." "I can break your hands," Bumpy added quietly, "and you apologize anyway. Choose." "I'm sorry," Tommy whispered. "I'm sorry." 50 people watched a man who'd terrorized Harlem cry in the street. "This is what happens," Bumpy said, looking around, "when you disrespect black women in Harlem." He looked down at Tommy. "Leave. Don't come back." Tommy left New York 3 days later. P.O. understood something most 19-year-olds never do. Power isn't about winning one fight. It's about making sure you never have to fight the same one twice. The next morning, he walked into the Savoy ballroom and asked for Stephanie St. Clair. She already knew his name. "You made quite a scene," she said. "I want a job," Bumpy replied, "and protection for both of us." She studied him. Most boys wanted to be feared. This one wanted to be useful. "You start Monday." By afternoon, the word was everywhere. Bumpy Johnson worked for the Queen of Numbers. Legion d'Atomy Connors never came back to Harlem. The Hudson Dusters dissolved within months. And Bumpy Johnson spent the next 40 years becoming something Harlem needed, not just muscle, a protector. A symbol. Proof that respect was never granted. It was taken. And it all started with one night, one choice, one boy who decided that protecting his family mattered more than protecting himself. That's what made him a legend. Protecting himself. That's what made him a legend.